Okay, in this video we're going to quickly go through the basics of using Illustrator to create vector graphics. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about the principles and then we'll move on to an example. So the principles are Illustrator creates vector graphics. You can bring bitmaps into it and save them as part of the file, but generally speaking, bitmaps are used to, or as a reference image, a tracing image, sometimes, especially when you're learning it. So, Illustrator produces vector graphics by default, and these are shapes, mathematically defined shapes. The way that they're defined is using coordinates. So a coordinate system, you might be familiar with x and y values, and they represent a position in x-axis, which is the horizontal, and in the y-axis, which is the vertical. And obviously those who are familiar with video games might have heard, or 3D animation, of a z-axis, which represents depth. The reason vector graphics are so important, especially in graphic design for logos, illustrations, and a wide variety of other artwork, is because they're scalable, fully scalable, and scalable without any real impact on file size, whereas raster or bitmap graphics have a much bigger footprint. However, if it was that you were working on a photographic image, you definitely would not use a vector graphic package, because then it would far exceed its usual file size and far exceed that of a bitmap. But yeah, they're scalable. So you can take them from as small as a postage stamp, maybe even smaller, up to billboard size with no problems whatsoever. So a few terms that we'll come across or I'll use when we're working vectors. Talk about strokes. A stroke is simply the outline. When the outline has a style. We'll talk about fill, which is the body color, essentially. Fill's a more ubiquitous term, so it's something you may have come across in other packages such as Photoshop, Paint, any image package where you are expected to bucket fill a shape or an area. Another term that I've not actually included in this list, which is very important, is path. A path defines the shape. So the mathematical definition of the shape, the line that defines that, is known as the path. And the path isn't visible in the final graphic when you output it, but it is represented in the authoring software when you are creating them. And this path is basically the joining of anchor points. The anchor points define the perimeter of the shape. They define the corners or the curves, which are known as Bezier curves, a special type of mathematically defined curve. We won't get into the maths here, just be happy with the knowledge that we create Bezier curves and we use the handles in Illustrator to achieve this. Every anchor point can have up to 2 handles, so that the line segment can have an effect on the curve of the line coming in to that anchor point and an effect of the curvature of the line segment going out. So there's 2 ways of working. If you were just working with basic polygonal shapes, you will just do point to point, a bit like dot to dot. But when you're using more complex and fluid curved shapes, that's when it really comes into its own. And the tools we will be predominantly using, aside from the selection tool, which is for moving around and just general selection of objects, will be the pen tool, which we use to create paths, the direct selection tool, which we use to edit paths in particular, and the convert anchor tool, which allows us to convert the Bezier curve handles on an anchor point. So it allows us to insert curves or amend curves. We could also use shape tools, and then with the direct selection or the pen tool or the convert anchor tools, amend the shape that we have created. Okay, so now let's just dive into Illustrator. The version I'm working with is CS6, but the principles are the same and have been the same for quite some time. Where you find the features and the tools might change from distribution to distribution. Okay, so in front of you, you will now see the IBM version of the IBM logo that Paul Rand did for a poster. I think it was in 1981. It's quite a famous piece. And all we were really going to do is to produce a version of it. The version I produced is not highly accurate, but it's close enough to be recognizable. And the best way to learn how to use Illustrator really is to have a tracing image and then to use that to learn the tools. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is hide my version, which is on top. So now you can see the original. A few differences. I've got a stroke around the eye, which is evident. Differences in the colour of the wings of the bee and the body, to be honest, there's a slight difference there, and also with the size of the M. But aside from that, it looks pretty similar. So the first thing you would usually do to bring an image in as a tracing image is you would choose image and place. Now the reason it won't let me do that at the moment is because I'm selected a layer that's not actually visible. And my bottom layer is locked, so I will unlock it so that I can show you place. File and place. That allows you to select an image and then place it inside of a document, particularly a bitmap. Once that has been inserted using place, it will be added to the layer. I am then locking the layer entirely and creating a new layer above to work on. So layer 1 is essentially a working layer or tracing image. And for this example, really, I would probably aim to use the shape tool more than anything else. An ellipse tool would be perfectly fine for the eyes and the iris and the pupil. The wings, I could probably create a circle and then change the form of the circle a little bit. That could be created, the body with a rectangle or a rounded curved rectangle, the M with the pen tool but without actually curves. So I will focus on the eyebrow and the eye as an example of using the pen tool, but usually it's for more complex things. So I select the pen and then I'll go onto my layer. So I'm on layer above the tracing image. Currently I've got it set as a black fill, which I don't really want, and a stroke of nothing. So what I could do on this image, with it being having a dark background, is choose a white stroke and give it a couple of pixels stroke. So it should hopefully stand out against that background, and it does stand out pretty well. Just step back, and the path itself is green. It might be difficult to see the actual anchor point and handles, but in the center there is the anchor point and the handles are at the extremes. The handles are circular and the anchor point is actually a square, although it can be very difficult to see without magnification of your screen. I suppose I'll just show you that now and then we'll take it for granted after that point. There we go. little bit on the slow on the uptake. 200%, 300%. Okay, you should just about be able to make out that this part is round, like a circle. This is a circular ball, and this bit is square. So that's the way that it looks. I'll just step back. When you're creating a shape with the pen tool, when you click, you can create shapes just using point to point to point, like so, and that will just create a polygon of some description, a multi-sided shape. But when we want to create curves, we have to click and drag at the same time to pull out our handles. So at this point, the handle is defining the way that the line will leave that anchor point. And if I was to say, put an anchor point here, you'll see how that has defined that already. If I was to then continue to drag, having not let go of the left mouse button, then I start to pull the handle out. Now, it's actually this handle at the top that I'm interested in for that segment. And you'll notice that if I pull that handle up, it changes the way that line curves outwards. And the same with this one. If they're both going in the same direction as each other, you get what is known as a C curve, essentially. And if we were to pull one in the opposite direction like that, you get what is an S curve. And that is the extremities or the limitations of a line segment. You can do a C or an S, and if you can break down your shape into those forms, you should be able to reduce it to the minimum number of anchor points. And that is what you're aiming for, is to reduce the amount of anchor points that you use to keep the shape smooth for both printing and display purposes, and also to reduce the file size as much as possible. Okay, so whilst I'm still zoomed in, I will just do this first part. So the lines down the edges are straight lines, and they're very much just going to be an anchor point and then an anchor point. I can then convert that anchor point. If I hold the Alt key, it should change the way that this anchor point comes out. So I'll point it roughly in that direction, and then I will create another anchor point at the other side. I'll pull that handle out, and then I'll amend it afterwards. You'll notice that it's actually black. That's because I've got a black fill at the moment. So I'll just amend it so that it fits roughly over, like that. And we know that that's pretty close. Put another anchor point in here. And then you'll see that there's a handle sticking out there that I need to remove. And the way that I do that is I put it over the top of the anchor point. So I take the handle, put it over the top, and then that will straighten the line out. I'm then going to have to zoom out now, to be honest. I'll turn magnifier off and just get rid of that fill so I can see what I'm doing. So when I select the fill drop down here, I go to the little white square with a red line through it. That means no fill. I don't really want to fill at the moment. I'm quite happy with a white stroke to help me see. So select the pen tool again, and then I choose the anchor point that I want to start from. It could be either end, to be honest. And then I'm going to click. Pull out the handle. And then I'll join this at the other end. Sometimes joining to create a shape can be a bit challenging, because if you don't get it right first time and you don't have to convert the anchor point, what you find yourself doing is converting the whole point so you create a curve on both sides of it. That's not ideal. As it happens in this case, it's worked out pretty well. It's a pretty simple shape. Don't have to worry about it too much. Okay, and then I can fill that in with a colour. I'll probably do that later on. So I'll then do the same for the eye, but I might choose a different stroke colour to help me with this. Maybe a light blue will just make it easier to pick out the outline of the the black background. If it's something a bit, maybe even red actually, it needs to stand out against red and black. So using the convert anchor point tool, I will just pull that handle up before I create the next anchor point. And I'm aiming to get to the other side of the eye. Should be able to do this in just a couple of points. Pull that down, and then I'm going to convert both anchor points. So I pull that handle up like that. That's pretty close. This one, like so. And maybe pull this one in a bit, and then pull this one out so they're a bit more even. Okay, and then I will join the shape together, although actually ideally I think I need to convert anchor points. I'm holding Alt at the moment just so I can pull a handle out first before I create this segment of the line. Join it together, pull the handle out, try and get it as close to. That's pretty close. Holding Alt again. Sometimes get the warning. You can turn it off if you want, although it's quite useful to know if you've hit the handle. Handles are quite small, it's very difficult to achieve. And that's pretty much it. The eye's taken care of itself. The next thing I just need to do is use the shape tool to create some ellipses roughly in the area. Holding shift, I can constrain the proportions. That's about the same size. I'll then just move that up. It's almost perfect. You kind of want to be aiming for a point that's just level with the left edge and top edge of the circle to get it roughly in the right place. You can see that's done the same thing. Okay, so I'm now going to hide the background layer, which is the tracing image. I'll just open up Magnify again so we can see what's going on there. When you get used to working with the software, you will get a lot faster at this. So the tracing image is locked. It's currently visible. I'm going to make it invisible, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the layer that I've been working on, and you'll see that inside of it there are paths which are kind of represented as sublayers. So there's the parts of the eye, and there's the outside of the eye, and that's the path for the eyebrow. And so when you're working on a layer, each individual path has its own depth order. So that's something to bear in mind. When it comes to filling colours in, there's a few different ways of achieving this. You can select your shape first, and at the top you can change the fill and stroke colours there. You can do it at the left hand side here on the tool panel. You can also do it with the colour wheel, colour selector, but for that to work you need to make sure that you've either got the fill at the front or the stroke at the front, depending on which colour you want to change. There's also a swatch list. You can bring in swatch libraries, create your own swatches, which is very useful when you're working on a project to create consistent colours, to either use one of the colour books or if you're going to do spot colours, to then have the values set, and then you can have consistent designs, which is usually a desirable thing. Okay, so the colour I'm going to put on the eyebrow, I'll just take a basic orange for now, and for the eye itself I'll take white. I don't actually need the stroke really, so I can turn that off now. The centre of the eye, off the top of my head, was blue. I'll take the stroke off there as well, and obviously the pupil always black, and I'll take the stroke off of that too, which was just there really as a guideline. I can also take the stroke off the eyebrow. I don't really need it. So then if we go back to layers and I just switch the tracing image on and turn off the eye that I've been working on. Oh, it's a brown eye. Oh, well, I'll live with a blue eye for now. Okay, so what we can also do is amend a shape. So I'm going to stick with that orange colour. I'm going to choose a rectangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to roughly find the top and the top left point of that shape and draw a rectangle over it that fills the whole thing. Okay, there we go. It's a little bit off. I might just make it a bit wider. So using the selection tool, I can select it and make it wider, just a touch. I'm going to have a stroke for now, and then I'm going to get rid of the fill for a little while whilst I'm changing the shape. Now, there are 6 anchor points on this shape. Sorry, no, 8. There's 3 at the top, 3 at the bottom, and 2 in the middle there. And really, we don't need these ones at the side. So what I'll do is I'll turn it into a diamond first. So I use the direct selection tool, and using that I can select any specific anchor points. So I'll select the anchor point that I wish to dispense with. Oh, no, it says we've only got 4 anchor points. Let's zoom out again. Ah, yes. They're the the resize handles that we see. I've got the control key held. So what I'll actually do is I will change the position of that point to be roughly where the curve starts. And same with this one. There's a couple of ways we could approach this. The anchor points could be down the side just as easily as they are. To keep them in line with each other, I can actually hold the shift key. That should allow it to snap. It's a little bit off, but I'll live with that for now. And then to there. Okay. And the same kind of thing as we were doing before. I'll just use the convert anchor point tool, which there is a dedicated tool for. Use a hand tool to move it over. Shortcut for that is H. Anchor point. So I'll click on each of these anchor points and I'll drag out the handles for them, like so. I'll preferably, what I want to do is create a smooth shape the whole way around. I might need to add in some anchor points, but we'll see how we can do first off. Yeah. So I'll put some anchor points in the side once I've got these curves put in place. I'll just pull this out first before I try and fix the other part of it. Okay. And the same at the top. sometimes be a bit fiddly. You'll notice that I had to undo a couple of bits there. Okay. So then I'm going to put in, or move my anchor points. Yeah, actually, I'll move those anchor points. We can still do this in 4. So I'll actually put that at the edge of the square edge rather than the top edge, like so. Roughly around there. Around there. And then I'll just reset those anchor points first. You simply click on them to reset them, if you can hit them. There we go. There we go. Both sides. It's there and thereabouts. It could be closer to the point. So I'll pull those handles out first off. Okay. Cursor goes white when that's been fixed correctly. Just undo that so I can get hold of the right handle. You can actually use a direct selection tool to recover the handle that you want to. And you can also just point the handle straight down the line if you want. And it's there or thereabouts. Okay, there's one last thing that I'm going to do, and then I'll end this example, which is to break this into a black and white shape. It's quite a simple way of doing that once I've filled it with colour. So I'll select the shape with the selection tool, fill it with that colour again. No longer need the stroke, but I do need to be able to see roughly where the black bands go. And what I can do is open up the layers, just hide that for a second, and I'll create a rectangle of a different colour, any colour for now. I'll go with black, although it might be difficult to see. And then I draw a rectangle which will overlap and is roughly the right size, or as close to as I possibly can get. Then, because they're a consistent size, I'm going to copy and paste this 3 times. So I can hold the Alt key, click with the left mouse, and drag down. And then again, if I need to resize them, I could resize them independently. These will all be in the front. I also need to bring back my curve shape and select that at the same time. So what I'm doing is I'm shift selecting. Click once, then shift click, and shift click, and you'll notice they're all selected. First off, I need to group them. The shortcut for that is Control G. You should also be able to right click and group there. This will then allow me to use the pathfinder. What I'm going to use is one called divide. I click on that once it's been grouped, and that will now allow me, once I go into the object group in isolation mode, the way I do that is double click, and you'll notice at the top that it's changed the way that it appears. So I'm inside of the group, and then when I select different segments, you'll notice that I can just delete those bits, and it will take on the shape that existed beforehand, which is great, especially if you've got a curve in that shape. I can then go back to the layer or back to the main view, and if we just isolate out the original so we can see what we've got in this example so far, there we've got the eye and the body of the bee. Moving on from that, and there isn't really much that you could not achieve with those techniques with the rest of it, creating the wings, creating the bee's head, creating the M itself. The M is the same kind of principle, so if you just have a look at it, the M has got lines through it, and it's the same kind of principle. You can just very quickly overlay it with intersections, and it's much quicker than trying to draw the individual shapes with the individual angles and line segments that you would have to. Okay, so I will end this example at that point.